Today we're reflecting on the readings for the 25th Sunday of Ordinary Time. Our first reading is from Wisdom, chapter 2, Psalm 54. Second reading is James, chapter 3. Our gospel is Mark, chapter 9. Our focus today is on persecution, sin, and that eternal struggle. Again, I try to tell you guys when things hit me just so that you can get a little bit of insight into my spiritual life. But this reading is one that always hits me. The wicked say, let us beset the just one because he is obnoxious to us. That is us, especially when we were in high school. How often do we get mad at somebody just because they're a good person and they're better than we are? Not in a way that is necessarily, now it might be the case and that would add to it, but be more justified, but somebody is just better than us and we get mad. We might think first of our sports. If there's somebody who's in a similar position as you that is better than you, especially if you're kind of close, there's a natural rivalry. Which one of us is better? Even though we're on the same team, we have the same goal, we're there to assist each other, there can be a rivalry of sorts. When we go to school, our purpose is to learn. And so when that student raises their hand and says, teacher, teacher, you didn't give us any homework, or teacher, teacher, you said that there was going to be a test today, everybody turns against him or her. And in all honesty, I was the one that turned against that person. But what is their goal? Their goal is us getting better, us learning things. And the same thing, those things carry on into our work life, our home life, our neighborhoods. And so, just to start with, I want to encourage you to pray with that and ask yourself, where have you struggled with that? And maybe where are you still holding on to resentments? If by God's grace you have grown out of it to where you are no longer as quickly upset by those type of circumstances, those types of people, we might still have resentments from our past that we need to let go of. And so this might be a good phrase for us to go back to and to pray with and to ask the Holy Spirit to be with us. One way to pray with. A second way, and this goes in with the rest of the reading where they say, for if the just one be the Son of God, so if it is the Messiah, to use the fullness of what will be revealed to us, God will defend him and deliver him from the hands of the foes. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, for according to his own words, God will take care of him. So this just person, if they're from God, God will take care of them, so let's try to kill him. Hopefully we quickly see the logic there and how terrible it is. But doesn't that language sound very much like Jesus in his temptation in the wilderness? If you are the Son of God, throw yourself off of the Temple Mount. God will protect you. He said, lest you dash your foot against a stone. We can have that same tendency. Again, if this is truly somebody doing God's will, or if this is truly a good person, they can withstand this difficulty or this trial or this hostility that I want to show towards them. All sin is a failure to love the way that we should. And I think what these readings are getting at, because again, this is going to be the theme through each one of our readings today, is that we need to remember that we're in this together and that we can have this tendency towards people. Now, it may not be to the point of taking them to physical death, but it might manifest itself as gossip, as slander, as insult, as libel. There's different ways in which we can commit sins against the fifth commandment against this person. And so, maybe especially again, taking it to prayer, who are the people we're still angry with or are regularly frustrated with unjustly? Where are those things dwelling up within us? And the more we can be mindful of them, the more we can take them to the Lord, ask for the grace to help us do better, and hopefully put these sins behind us. But again, keeping some of these things in our mind as we continue to move forward. On the flip side, and this will lead us into our psalm, because our psalm, being a prayerful response, is from the mind or the place of the just one. And so sometimes, especially if we are pursuing God, people will be mad at us just because we are pursuing God. Maybe we've experienced that in our life. Maybe we've had people frustrated with us because they think we're holier than thou. We're the people pushing an agenda or whatever the case may be. Politically, I think we see this with the idea of wanting to say some of our things. We've seen this in some countries. I know this is the case in some of the like Canada and some of the other Western world countries, that if the church or a member of the church were to teach what the church truly teaches, especially when it comes to human sexuality, that's a hate sin. What am I doing when I teach that? I'm saying this is what God has revealed to us. Living not according to it or any other place is harmful. It's not good for you. I'm not telling you that you can't do it. I'm telling you you shouldn't do it. I'm not forcing you not to do it. I'm not making you listen to my words. I'm not coming to your house to say it. I'm saying it in a church or in a setting that is tied to the church. But people can get mad. People can get frustrated. Again, I've talked about it before. When I go out in public, I overall get positive encounters or neutral encounters. Let's say they're moving slowly more neutral than positive as of late, but very seldom negative. But most of the time when it's negative, they have no idea who I am. It's just because I'm a priest. And that might be tied to abuses in the past, but I think a part of it, and this is my guess, my intuition, so I could be wrong, but I think a part of it is that growing divide between what the church teaches and what the culture wants to believe. And just my walking through the grocery store and this gets me some funny looks. Again, nothing by any means close to what we have in our reading, our first reading. Um, but just to know that that might be something either we have encountered or might encounter in the future. Just as this continues to manifest itself. Again, this is going back thousands of years. We're given this wisdom. It reaches its beautiful fulfillment in Jesus and will continue to echo throughout the rest of time until Jesus comes back in the fullness of time. Second reading, James. Same type of idea. He says a couple of beautiful phrases, and maybe just going through this reading slowly and parsing out certain little phrases, maybe even a couple sentences or a sentence at a time, and just maybe praying with it. Maybe putting it in your prayer chair, by your prayer chair, wherever you pray, and slowly going through it. But where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every foul practice. Jealousy and selfish ambition. Sin is failure to love well. Sin is also selfishness. That's where the idea that all sin is rooted in pride comes from, which is an idea. Some theologians propose other sins. I fall into the pride. I have not been argued out of that yet. But at every moment, and this comes from now a decade of hearing confessions and a lifetime of going to confession, every sin is a choice for what I want over what God has told me is good for me, what I ought to want. So that selfish desire, even if it's as simple as my pleasure in my life, disorders my life, moves me out of the way. And he goes on the next sentences, but wisdom from above, so what God has revealed to us, is first of all pure, then peaceable, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits. Think for a moment of somebody holy that you know. You know, I've got several priests that are my models that I try to imitate. They live into that, especially the peaceful, gentle, compliant, even though part of what attracts me to them is I know that they have stood up heroically for the truth. So getting some hostility because they are part of the just one. They're echoing Jesus' words, letting Jesus work through them. For those who are able to see John Paul or St. Teresa of Calcutta in their lifetime, even from a distance, maybe you can witness some of that they have this, even though they've got that power and that firmness within them, we still see this tied there. A saint is somebody who is full of peace, even if they need to be, aggressive or firm at times. It's not going to be a hostile aggressiveness, but it's firmness in the truth of who they are and what Jesus has revealed. This is a very powerful reading that we ought to pray with. And then he goes on to say a little bit later, where do the wars and the conflicts among you come from? Is it not from your passions? The way God made us is we have an intellect, we have will, we have passions. Intellect is our brain. Will are the decisions we make. Passions are our feelings, to put it very, very simply. Our intellect is meant to dictate our will, and from that, our passions flow. So I know that exercise is good. Good for my mind, good for my soul, good for my body. And so intellect, knowing that, makes me make the decision to work out. And eventually I have good feelings around it. My feelings will line up with Now, that might take a while to get my body adapted. It might be I have to see the change in medical tests or scale or whatever the case may be, but eventually there will be good feelings to go along with it. That's how it ought to be ordered. How things tend to be ordered is I enjoy double bacon cheeseburgers. Instead of having one from time to time, I want 18 a day. That's what my passion is. Therefore, I make the choice for it. And then in my brain, I just tell myself that it's okay. I'll go for a run later. I'll go for a ride later. Or I'll have a salad tomorrow, whatever the case may be. We have our passions drive us. And if we pay any attention to the world around us, that is what is happening. Our passions are driving us. Those are what are making our decisions. The problem is we as a society no longer know how to think. That is a terrible, terrible tragedy. We can no longer have an argument. An argument is not a fight. An argument is a debate or a discussion. And I didn't even watch the presidential debate that, when this comes out, I think will happen a couple weeks before. But what I've seen in the past are just insults. It's not actually having a conversation about things. It's just mudslinging. And if that's not what was the case was here, that's overall what the case is in our society today. My feeling is this, and therefore this is right, you're wrong, you should die. Going back to our first reading. Pray with that. Allow yourself to be challenged by it. And, we can find beautiful things in the catechism, beautiful books on virtue or beautiful talks on virtue. Maybe trying to allow ourselves to enter into it. 'Cause if we get those things properly ordered again, sin gets rooted out of our life, and that's how we move in the direction of being pure, peaceable, gentle, compliant, full of mercy, and good fruits, aka a saint. And then our gospel. This is following Jesus' scene at Caesarea Philippi, which Mark succinctly tells us that story. And we also have Jesus once again speaking of his death. Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him, showing us the humility that Jesus has for us. Then, of course, he says on the third day he will rise. But they did not understand, because that makes sense. Until you see somebody rise from the dead, it might be hard to fully wrap. If actually, I take that back. It's hard for me to still grasp what that would have been, what it would have looked like, and how they would have responded to it. I know it happened. I'm staking my life on it as a priest, but does not mean that I understand it, especially if you haven't seen it. But they were afraid to question him. How often in your prayer life are you afraid to question Jesus? Not in a necessarily doubting manner or an insulting manner, not like Zechariah says, how is this possible? But like Mary, how are you going to do that? You want me to conceive, but I've promised to stay a virgin. How's that work? That's a legitimate question. How do I have a baby without having relations with my husband? How are you going to die and rise? You haven't seen it yet. That's a legitimate question for them to ask. We need to make sure that we ask those questions. God, please help me understand what you're doing in my life. Please help me know what you want me to do. We need to go to the Lord with what's going on inside of our heart and to try to have again that question of Mary, not Zechariah. We're just asking God to show us. Because when we don't understand, we fall into the trap of what these men are doing today. Jesus is talking about, I am the Messiah. That's what Peter has acknowledged. I am the Son of God. And again, what they fully understood, we don't know, but they're getting closer to the truth of who Jesus fully is. And they're focused on their conception of what that's supposed to be. In short, a worldly leader and different manifestations of what that would look like. And so what do they talk about? Because they're not paying attention to the cross. They're only paying attention to the resurrection. They were discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. The exact opposite of what Jesus has. They're focused on their passions, not the intellect. They're getting it backwards, as James talks about today. So Jesus says, so he sat down, which is the position of a teacher at this time, opposite what we have today. So he gets in his teaching position and says, if anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all. Another phrase that I've heard in a few different ways is that the leader eats last. Put other people before you. As I say at Mass, look for the next person to serve. Just be a servant of the people around you, and that's how we grow in fluency. That's how we put all these things into practice. That's how we imitate Jesus. And that might be in the simple things of things of our household, finding opportunities to serve. Sometimes it'll be much more great, but at the end of the day, these little servings aren't huge distractions from our life, and oftentimes they are the most beautiful and fruitful. Side note that just popped into my head. That's the joy of these things, just being spur of the moment. So having a conversation with you yesterday, I've had quite a few sick calls recently, at the time of this recording. And people oftentimes ask, what do you like most about being a priest? What do you dislike the most about being a priest? And this probably isn't the best way to word it, but I haven't found a better way after a decade to word it. But one of the things I dislike the most are sick calls. Not because I don't enjoy walking with families in it. That part is beautiful and amazing. But when somebody calls me for an anointing, they're having at least a not great day, if not a terrible day, in the case of somebody who's getting ready to die. And so that's the part that is hard of walking into those circumstances. No, I also have to say that some of the most beautiful things that I do are sick calls, walking with those families. So it's not something that I enjoy. I never dance for joy when my phone rings and says, it's Olathe Med Center, Deacon Trump, who takes care of our sick calls to help coordinate those now. It's not like I'm excited when I get those things, but I also know that God is going to do something beautiful. And so I think it's a part of this gospel there. Um, those little things that we can do to take care of people, even if it's not something we fully dance for joy with, God can do amazing and wonderful things with it. And he manifests this by taking a child, placed in their midst, put his arms around it, so embraced it, loving it, and said to them, whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. Whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me. And so, what was a child at this time? They were disposable, not too unlike parts of our culture today. So, we live in a time where abortion is rampant, and we have that all around us. But this is also nothing that is new. It was common practice to unfortunately take young children that were newly born and just throw them off to the side of the road into a ditch and allow them to die of exposure. So this is something that has been with us for a very, very long time. Um, just because we can do it earlier in the womb does not make it any better. And so we want to look at what the culture says as a whole. So that was the overall attitude, especially of young children. But in this time, and of course, this is generally speaking, so there were definitely people who loved their children. But what is a child? Somebody who can't do much work around the house, somebody you got to feed, somebody you got to clean up after, all those things that a children um, brings to the household is focused, especially as a culture, on those difficulties as opposed to the beauty and the hope that we can put into a child that we tend to emphasize a little bit more in our society today after a child has been born. Um, but that's what it would have been seen at. Here is a useless person, embrace him like ours. So it's not just embrace somebody who's full of hope and potential, embrace somebody who is not productive, somebody who's a drain on your life. Again, embrace those who are suffering, embrace those who need your help. And that's sort of the example that Jesus is setting before us. And when we love those type of people, embracing them, that's when we receive Christ. And again, what is that going to bring us? Probably that anger and hatred and violence that we see in our first reading, at least from certain people. Some difficult readings for us today, ones that probably should make us feel uncomfortable, especially if we are pursuing God and just some of those different things that come along with it. But I think some beautiful things that can deepen us in our relationship with God if we sit with them and allow them to challenge us. And I think, again, slowly going through that second reading and first reading can be very powerful for us in our spirit. God bless.